Hello, I'm Paul Gambaccini. Welcome to It's All Happening at the Zoo, Part 5 of our series, Music in the Air.
All Europe Radio, Laser 558.
In the 1980s, pirate radio, which had not been an important factor in music broadcasting in over a decade, once again became the talk of the streets. The leading ocean-based service was Laser 558, which operated from the ship MV Communicator in the North Sea. It only thrived for a year and a half, but it made a deep impression on listeners and professionals alike.
That's Dire Straits at Laser 558. We're All Europe Radio. We are at 558 kilohertz AM. We're transmitting from aboard the MV Communicator in the North Sea. The airwaves are free, that's what we believe, and that means we're free to play as much music as we can, the top hits that you want to hear. You'll get at least 54 minutes of music every hour. We've got no breaks longer than a minute, some brief news headlines on the hour to keep you in touch with the world.
In the first lineup of Laser DJs, Jessie Brandon was the station's only female presenter. Even at this stage of radio history, the presentation of popular music was still considered primarily men's work. A female interloper was judged by male standards, as had been true in the case of Rachel Donahue, who broadcast with her husband Tom in the early years of American FM underground radio.
Absolutely. Girl jocks, they used to call us. And when I left in 1975, I left KSAN in San Francisco, the flagship of Metro Media, to move to Los Angeles to KMET after my husband Tom Donahue died. The voice of doom, whose name was Dave McQueen, who was the newsman, said, "I just want to say when you leave that you're a really good jock, and I don't mean just for a girl." And I was quite flattered.
The idea of a female DJ was so unusual that the pioneers were treated as novelty acts. WNEW-FM in New York broke from its AM counterpart on the 4th of July, 1966, with an attention-getting gimmick, a lineup of presenters who were all women. They didn't get credit for maturity. As the advertising campaign stated, "Vive la différence, the girls are here."
Isn't it pretty? Stay tuned to WNEW-FM 102.7 on your dial. Metro Media Stereo in New York for the news and weather and Bob Lewis. I'm Allison Steele. I'll be flying at 2 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Join me, won't you? Till then, love and peace. And many good days.
The leader of the group, and the one who survived the station's format change to progressive rock the following year, was Allison Steele, known as the Night Bird. Nearly every reference to a female rock presenter of the period would today sound sexist. The situation in the UK was no better, as the first female DJ on Radio 1 discovered. For years, the only woman on the network was Anne Nightingale.
I'd done quite a lot of television by then. I've been a journalist, I've written magazines and all that. I love music and I love talking about music, so to me the next thing would be, right, well, I wouldn't mind having a go at this then. And then the doors were very tightly shut, bolted, locked, and they said, "We don't want any women."
1970 was your year, wasn't it? Mm. How did it happen?
Radio 1 was beginning to get quite a lot of bad press because of this very sexist attitude. And I had to, I must admit, help orchestrate part of that, because I used to write anti-Radio 1 things in magazines and saying, you know, this was a big year for feminism, 1970. And so I think eventually the pressure was beginning to get to them. I think they thought, well, I guess we'll have to have somebody. We'll have to have some token woman. Who do we know? And all I wanted to do was say, can I have a go at this? If I'm no good, absolutely fine. I will leave you alone forever. I just want to have a go. And all it was to me, and I haven't changed my point of view at all, it was my enthusiasm about music. I've been writing reviews of music, but you could never really get that across. It's so much easier to actually play the tune to someone and say, hey, listen to this, see what you think. What do you think of this? See if they shared your opinion. That was it. What's the difference? Nothing's changed, really. That's what I love doing.
The time on Radio 1 is 5 o'clock, and here is Anne Nightingale, as promised, to introduce the... Let me think.
I'm sorry, Terry.
Look, who's the senior man around here?
You are.
Not so senior, though. What's new?
Thank you very much, Terry. Incidentally, I have a friend called Henry who's very large, and he has a complaint to make about you. He says that he's been fighting off flab ever since you started your whole campaign. He drives along in his car, and as soon as that comes on, he leaps out of his car, side of the road, does all the exercises, and he says he's now put on 4 pounds, Terry.
I thought you were going to tell me he was knocked 40 yards by a passing truck.
No, but he's putting on weight. What are you going to do about it?
I'm not going to lay a finger on him, I'll tell you.
I shouldn't. He's bigger than you, Terry. Enough of this. We better get on with a programme. Bye-bye. I'll see you after Christmas. Maybe it is Christmas spirit coming up or something like that. Anyway, welcome to Thursday's What's New. It's the last one of the week this week, and it's all reissues this week. In fact, it's all the rusty oldies today, so I hope you'll enjoy all those.
After her appearances on What's New, Anne Nightingale shared a regular Wednesday evening Sounds of the 70s review program with Alan Black. She found her own successful format with The Request Show, which was broadcast first on Sunday afternoons and then following the top 40 at 7.
I didn't realise it was successful because every week I thought they were going to take it off. Because it was too weird, because it was too strange, we were playing all these odd things, and I thought, they're busy. Any minute now, they're going to have had enough of this. It started off as a 3 months filler, and it lasted for 12 years. What's interesting about that show now is that the people who said it influenced them, people like Irving Welsh, Radiohead, I'm quite proud of that. So that those tunes that we played affected those people as they were growing up in those tunes. And it was a brilliant slot, you know, after the top 40 on Sunday evening. You've really got a very good audience. They're doing their homework they should have done on Friday, and no one ever does, I'm sure, to this day. So you've got a captive audience. But you've had the top 40 on. They've listened to the top 40, that's one they've listened to. You've got to now try and hold on to that audience. And they used to say to me, the first record you play after the top 40 is the most important record played on Radio 1 during the week. It's got to be credible and good, familiar, not a turn-off to anyone. So it was a really interesting challenge every week to come up with that first record. And then I used to do this thing about going high, and then they never know when it was going to come, and that was just a little game.
Well, it was just before the vocal started.
Yeah, it was just before the vocal started, yeah. But a lot of people didn't realise that. It took them a while, so it was fun. People don't have catchphrases now, but that was the nearest I ever had to having a catchphrase. And I did feel this extraordinary affinity with these people. I would literally take sackfuls of letters home every week. Oh, I loved it. I read every one.
Now, yes, you were quite right. You were quite right. That used to be my end sig tune when I used to do a request programme on Sunday afternoons. So, memories for me. If the next record has sort of strange slurping sounds all over it, it's because I've just balanced the coffee cup in a very dangerous place right on the edge of the turntable. Still, we shall carry on. This is for John Morrison in Bognor Regis, Carol Patterson in Blythe, Colin Grimshaw in Woodford, Essex, and Paul Keane in Sutton Coldfield. You didn't think we'd get right through a programme without some Davy Bowie, did you?
Anne Nightingale ultimately transcended gender distinctions and became the longest-serving disc jockey on Radio 1. Despite her success after her arrival in 1970, there was a wait of a dozen years before the next female signing to Radio 1. In 1982, I undertook a national book tour. When I arrived back in London, Radio 1 controller Derek Chinnery asked me if I had been interviewed by anyone outstanding. I told him the best presenter I had encountered was a woman on BBC Radio Merseyside named Janice Long. Unbeknownst to me, there was a reason for Chinnery's question. Beginning on the 4th of December, 1982, Radio 1 was going to broadcast beyond 7:30 on Saturday evening, closing down at midnight. 2 new DJs were required. Derek and his ultimate successor as controller, Johnny Beeling, traveled to Liverpool and listened to Janice Long. Along with Gary Davis from the Manchester commercial station Piccadilly Radio, Janice was offered a job on Radio 1.
Janice Long! Coming up in the show tonight, apart from music, well, Godfrey will be giving us an insight into northern music. Mark my words, is looking at what's been happening. We've connections, 3 records that have something in common. There's a competition too. It's Janice Long on Radio 1. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you. This is Joe Jackson, and he is stepping out.
Like Anne Nightingale, Janice Long has enjoyed a long career at the BBC and has not usually been heard during the daytime. That Radio 1 glass ceiling was broken in the late 80s and 90s by pioneers including Liz Kershaw, Jackie Brambles, Emma Freud, and Zoe Ball. The role of women as popular music presenters has increased ever since, and gender equality has nearly been achieved. But one section of the population has become less represented on air. It's one that used to be considered one of the most important listening groups of all: children. Music radio no longer carries programs aimed specifically at the very young. The former pirate DJ Ed Stewart was the Radio 1 broadcaster most associated with programs for this age group of listeners.
Uncle Mac would have been my first memory of a presenter because we used to listen to children's favourites, little knowing that years later I'd be doing the same thing and being the other side of the microphone, so to speak. But he was what we used to listen to every Saturday morning because Mum and Dad enjoyed it too.
What was enchanting about him?
I don't know if it was so much him, it was his music. I was brought up as a very early days as a professional broadcaster. You're only as good as the music you play. So in other words, you've got to love the music you play. You've got to enjoy it like your audience hopefully are going to enjoy it. And I've kept that ever since.
Thank you, David Bowie. There he goes with Starman. And it's 8:45 on a Saturday morning, and all Susans listening at the moment. Oh, how many Susans? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. 9,643,402. Right, now, 9,643,403 is Susan Hubbard of 4 Andover Close in Luton, who was 5 the day before yesterday. So please play a special record for her today, Saturday, July the 29th. So Susan Hubbard, many happy returns, and I'd just like a friend of mine to come and sing happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you, squash tomatoes and stew, bread and butter in a gutter, happy birthday to you.
And Susie, wake up.
Hello, darling.
Thank you.
Those iconic clips of charming children became familiar parts of popular culture, but they might never have made it onto air. Junior Choice was first presented on Radio 1 by Leslie Crowther. Ed Stewart started his stint at the station with Happening Sunday. After only a few weeks, it was decided Ed and the show were not happening, and he switched to What's New. Only when the search was on for a new presenter for Junior Choice did a producer's wife suggest Ed's name.
Derek Chinnery's wife heard me doing a request in her car radio for some school kids on this What's New programme. And she said to Derek, do you know something? I know you're looking for a new presenter. I think I found the one for Junior Choice. That's how I got it. And they put me on a 3-week contract. 3 weeks, right? I used to say to Harry, good old, dear old Harry Walters, who was my producer, I said, Harry, this is the end of the 3rd programme, so my first 3-week series. I said, can I say I'm coming back next week? Because I still hadn't had the contract. He said, oh, of course you can. I said, but I've had no contract. He said, I will take the plunge. He said, I'm going to tell you now, yes, you can say you're coming back next week. And eventually I had a 3-month contract, and then a 6-month contract. In the halcyon days, even a 2-year contract. And when I first started, thankfully, Harry Walters said, I'm not staying with all the music which Uncle Mac played. He said, we're Radio 1 and Radio 2 now, because I was on both. He said, and frankly, we've moved on from that. I will have to include the Laughing Policeman, etc., etc. He said, but we're going to introduce pop music into this as well. And sure enough, we did. And we created records which had come out and made into monster number ones, like Ernie and Grandad and Two Little Boys. You know, it's a great quiz question, a trivia quiz. What was the last number one of the 60s? The swinging 60s with the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Searchers, Rolf Harris, Two Little Boys. So it was a fascinating mixture of music, but that was us.
And enjoying being on both 1 and 2, you have figures quoted as 17 million.
Yeah. Everywhere you went, people would react and say, I love that record you played the other day. And this and that. So that's why we had so many. Being on 2 stations at the same time, simultaneously, it was second only to Family Favourites, who apparently had 25 million.
Never get tired of that one, do we? There we are. Peter, Paul and Mary, of course, and Puff the Magic Dragon. Lovely. And that's Junior Choice for this Saturday, but don't forget I'll be back at 9 o'clock tomorrow then, all right? Bye!
There never was an equivalent of Junior Choice in the United States. Radio there was commercial, and young children have no buying power. But American radio has always been on the lookout for unserved parts of the population that do have money to spend. As we heard in Part 2 of this series, as early as the late 1940s, rhythm and blues records aimed at a black audience had been played by maverick DJs, often white men using the lingo of their listeners, such as Alan Freed and Hunter Hancock. Journalist and broadcaster Ben Fong Torres explains.
I think black radio came out of segregation because blacks were not allowed into the mainstream on any level. And so they were pretty much independent mom-and-pop operations. There were a couple of pioneer companies that created stations like WDIA in Memphis and then spread around the country, or at least to other markets like KDIA in Oakland. So they were early pioneer R&B stations. But there was no way for blacks to have jobs as announcers or salespeople or general managers or programmers at white-owned stations and the major networks. And, of course, the entrepreneurs among that community realized that this radio was a valuable new medium that helped them to not only make money, but to communicate with their communities. And so they created black radio.
One of the longest-serving presenters in black radio history, Gary Bird, began his broadcasts in the 1960s.
You're seeing a consciousness of a black market on the part of ownership in radio. So a number of stations are looking at successes that are going on in cities like Memphis and Atlanta with certain radio stations there, WDIA, WAOK, and so forth, and beginning to come to the conclusion, yeah, you can make some money with this format. And black people as a whole are beginning to be a more visible issue.
The man considered the father of black radio, Jack the Rapper, was born Jack Gibson. In 1949, he was part of a lineup on the first black-owned and operated station in the country, WERD in Atlanta. In 1955, he formed the National Association of Radio Announcers, the first important organization of African-American DJs. The expansion of black radio during the 50s and 60s went hand in hand with the civil rights movement. As Gary Bird remembers, music played an important part in the campaign, including songs written by Curtis Mayfield for his group, The Impressions.
Interestingly enough, in that time period, we're beginning to see an explosion of black radio that's beginning to happen. It's the beginning of the soul period. And with the soul music that was beginning to come, was also coming soul radio. We were calling it soul radio. And the idea was that it was a different kind of radio than the radio you're hearing down the dial and over there, because this is suddenly more and more black announcers in more and more cities who are actually conveying the energy of the street, playing music that in some instances you're not hearing. I mean, regionally, from one city to the next, the music could vary very greatly. And this also, I think, dovetailed into the popularity of the personality DJ, who was becoming very popular at that particular time because this is the person you hear every day. And suddenly there's this guy on the radio who has the ear of the community and who can command respect and attention and point towards different issues. And so you've got different DJs across the country, none of whom are going into a militant stance per se. But Dr. King himself talked at that time about the dramatic power of black radio and himself reached out to black radio DJs to say, you are there. You are the most important resource in the community for us to be able to make the boycott happen, for us to be able to make the march happen, to mobilize the people, to mobilize the forces. So you had DJs like Jack the Rapper, who was able to, for example, just reach out of his window and say to Dr. King, you know, it's 10 to 2, Dr. King, and here's the microphone.
I don't mind leaving here to show the world we have no fear, because we're a winner.
Black radio was owned by white people. It wasn't a black ownership that owned black radio. So white ownership had its own misgivings about, well, where is this thing going? Are we fomenting our own demise here? So, for example, if you take Curtis Mayfield, most people don't remember that We're a Winner was banned. It was a banned record. I mean, you listen to it now, and it's a very tame piece in relationship to what we may look at now. But at the time, just the idea of saying, we're a winner, was controversial and revolutionary. I mean, So they would not play the record. And I remember because at one point when I was playing, and I was told at one point you couldn't play Curtis Mayfield records. And we had a program director who says we're going to play them anyway, you know. And so we played them. But we weren't playing them without there being some degree of risk.
In Britain, radio exposure for black music was limited. Although groups like the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin were heavily influenced by American blues records, these discs never received airplay. Soul songs were played when they became pop hits or as part of specialist shows. On Radio 1's second day of broadcasting, Mike Raven's R&B show followed Pick of the Pops on Sunday. It then moved to Saturday evening.
And now it's 6 o'clock on a Saturday night. But surprise, surprise, here's Mike Raven. With the same old R&B show. So watch out. Here we definitely go. And to start off this bright Saturday show, here's a new one from O.C. Smith, no less.
Well, the path was deep and wide from footsteps leading to our cabin. Above the door there burned a scarlet lamp. And late at night a hand would knock and there would stand a stranger. Yes, I'm the son of Hickory Hollow's tramp.
Hello, and how's about a better new year?
In the late 70s and early 80s, the British blues pioneer Alexis Corner occupied the 7 o'clock slot following the Radio 1 Top 40. His mix of soul, gospel, and what became known as world music was a particular inspiration to Andy Kershaw, who arrived at the station in 1985. Alexis's voice was envied by all the DJs.
And my name's Alexis Corner, and I'm very pleased to be back with you again for another series of the sort of music that you're likely to hear on this show. If you listened to it last time round, you'll know what I'm talking about. Incidentally, you might also have noticed we've got a new theme tune, Dr. Strut playing Struttin'. The band, incidentally, I just received a letter from them, happens to be without a recording contract, so anyone interested in Dr. Strut, get to work.
Alexis Corner passed away in 1984. The following year, the key figure in black music broadcasting ever since, Trevor Nelson, began his career. He was 21 years old, and he was music mad.
I listened to exclusively 2 shows on radio, and one was Robbie Vincent. I think he did a stint on Radio 1 at one point. And the other was Greg Edwards on Capital. Those 2 go down as the key shows. For music lovers of soul music and jazz funk in the southern parts of the UK, I can honestly, because there's definitely a divide. It was Greg Edwards on Capital Radio, your buck-out buddy and refugee from across the sea. I even remember he saying the bathroom call. He had stuff like that, and he used to sing a lot over the songs. He was a very happy guy. And Robbie Vincent, who was complete opposite, very English, very broadcasting, his delivery, but played more of a jazz style. We play a lot of Japanese jazz and jazz funk. And those were my 2 shows.
A 12-inch from ace guitarist Jonathan Butler, Baby Please Don't Take It. Dedicate that to Marilyn Mackenzie and Garnis and Airdrie. Hi Marilyn, it's her man. He's not with her tonight and it's their anniversary, so hi to you, Terry, and lots of love from Marilyn. She's thinking of you.
If the record bill and the friends are at the door, invite them on in a dream to Robbie Vincent show. In tune with the best soul sounds around on Radio 1, spread the word around. Yeah.
Robbie Vincent was the first of the Radio 1 soul specialists to earn a place on the station's annual calendar. He inspired devotees like Trevor Nelson to seek their own radio careers, regardless of whether the law approved.
My being on Pipe Radio in the 80s, I felt like I was on a mission. I felt like I was one of Jesus' disciples, almost. That's the way you feel when you're actually broadcasting and playing music that you know no one else on radio in the country is playing. This is the key thing, you know, for us. This was our raison d'etre. But we're playing records you can only hear in a nightclub.
Do you think that the existing stations chose not to play this material, or were they just behind?
I think the existing stations didn't need to play this material. Remember, the audience I'm talking about that had a demand for music pirate radio was still a niche audience. It was not an audience that's going to get you loads of advertisers. It's not an audience that, you know... This is way before the internet and YouTube and kids being able to download music for free. The only way you could hear the songs I liked was to go to a nightclub. I spent half of my time in a nightclub asking the DJ, getting the courage up to ask the DJ what was that record. Or in the other half of my life I spent leaning on the record shop counter, listening to everything that came in. And this is how you spent your life if you were a music fan most of the time. You couldn't get a black music fan, that is. You couldn't get our music on radio that often.
Pirate radio had a history of coming from the high seas. In the 80s, it often originated on land from makeshift studios in cities, easily traceable by the Department of Trade and Industry, which was keen to shut them down.
The first show I ever did for Kiss FM was below the Ladbrokes betting shop, Walworth Road, Camberwell. And I'm an East London boy, so I needed a visa to get across the bridge for that one. That scared me initially. I walked past the door about 5 times before I had the courage to go in case somebody was looking. It was real cloak and dagger stuff. And then it was in a basement, cramped basement. I got the opportunity to do the last show of the night. My responsibility was to turn off the station after I'd finished and then not only get out without being seen, then get in my car and then find my way back home across the bridge. So for me, I felt I was in a Hollywood movie, a thriller. We were on air for a few years, on and off, getting raided. We were threatened with prison sentences, at worst. Minimal was confiscating your music, which to me was worse than a prison sentence, you can imagine. And I was scared. We were all scared. We didn't want to be the person to get caught. But the DTI was the scariest thing. So when they came up with the suggestion that they will grant somebody a licence if we come off and apply through the right procedures and stuff. We did. We came off air, which killed us. I mean, it took the momentum out of ourselves. Missing 1 week was bad enough, far less a year. Jazz FM got the licence to our utter... I mean, I remember I was devastated. We agreed that a load of MPs in Parliament probably liked jazz, and I mean, we like jazz, but it wasn't important to have a legal jazz station. It was more important to have a legal dance station. So we were very upset and we felt we were duped, but we did the right thing and reapplied. And lo and behold, made history, which was a day, I can tell you.
This is Gordon Mack. There are no words to express the way I feel at this moment, so with your permission, I'd just like to get something out of my system altogether. Rihanna! Welcome, London.
People Station, and the system, DTI, love them, because we love them. Them a call us pirates, them a call us illegal broadcasters, just because we play what the people want.
The first record played on the legal Kiss FM was the appropriately named Pirates Anthem. One of Trevor Nelson's colleagues on the earlier Kiss, Tim Westwood, became Britain's leading hip-hop DJ. Radio 1 would, in the 90s, hire DJs who had been pirates in the 80s, but during the 80s it was taking a good percentage of its presenters from local commercial stations. Among the new arrivals were 2 men who had started on Radio 210, Mike Reed and Steve Wright.
Me and Mike Reed and a few others were lucky enough to get jobs in local commercial radio, and that was kind of at the start, in the first few years of commercial radio. In local radio, you learn your trade.
Who was the man or woman who talked about meaningful speech?
Meaningful speech was invented by the Independent Broadcasting Authority, as they were. I guess they're now the Radio Authority. And these were instructions to all commercial radio stations. And I think this was a hangover, if you like, from the old BBC days, where it has to be some form of public service. So memos used to come round to all the stations, and when I worked in commercial radio, there were only 19 stations. And they would listen to an hour of your programme and then report on what they considered was the amount of meaningful speech in any given hour. But, you know, far from being offended by that, I thought, well, in a kind of subversive way, I thought, well, I'll try and throw in as much meaningful speech along with the entertainment. So, in fact, honestly and truly, I'm grateful to it, because I think it made me slightly better. I'm more aware of not being too self-indulgent.
Come up and see me to make me smile.
Rise and shine, wakey wakey. It's coming round to 11 minutes to 8. Radio 210 coming at you. 210 metres medium wave, 1431 kilohertz, 97 FM in stereo. Here's something from 210 Cares. 3/4 of a ton of garden earth, good quality in brackets, is on offer from Stephen Denton of Dawlish Road in Reading. His Friends of the Earth. He's giving it away. His number is Reading.
Steve made the transition to Radio 1 via a short stint on Radio Luxembourg. He soon found his perfect time slot and format.
We'll rerun the celebrity trivia quiz in a moment, and we'll have some stuff on the future. Can I remind you that radio is a wonderful medium? Unfortunately, I'm a small.
Steve Wright.
Yes, sir.
This is me again from Pearly, Mr. Angry.
Mr.
Well, I'm
Angry.
reading about a couple of things in the paper today.
Oh, yeah?
I see this boy George chap.
Yeah?
Is on the front page because he's been put in the waxworks now.
That's right,
But
yes.
if a son of mine looked like that, I'd be very worried, I can tell you.
Would
He's
you?
been put in Madame Tussauds.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, that reminds me.
Yeah?
I've got to catch a ferry today. You don't happen to know the times of them, do you?
What for?
Oh, I'm going to go and vote in the Euro elections.
You don't have to actually go there.
What do you mean?
You don't have to go abroad.
What do you mean I don't have to?
Well, you just do it
Well,
here.
what's the point of having Euro elections if you can do them here?
What are you talking
It's no
about?
fun at all, is it?
Don't
Makes
talk
me see.
nonsense.
They've been telling us to go and vote. I decide to go and vote, and somebody on the BBC tries to put me off.
Well,
that
isn't
makes
that-
me very angry. In fact, it makes me so angry.
Yes.
So angry.
Yes.
So angry. I can throw the phone down.
Mr. Angry was one of the cast of characters on Steve Wright in the Afternoon, the phenomenally successful Radio 1 program that popularized in Britain the zoo format that had been made famous in New York by Scott Shannon on Z100. Several presenters performed specialized tasks, some informative and some amusing, in the service of one frontman.
The Zoo Crew, Z100.
Good morning, Z100 Radio.
The Z Zoo in the morning, in the morning, in the morning. On Z100.
Hello, this is Fast Freddy with the story of Z100. August 1983, Z100 hits the airwaves. Everybody laughs, ha ha ha, but not for long. Z100 beats WABC, WAPP, WKHK, WKTU, WBLS, WNBC, Quack Quack, and all the rest.
Yeah, Scott Shannon is a DJ who really brought on that so-called zoo format that we do, although I have to say that the format in the Radio 1 days, the zoo format that they say I introduced, firstly, I don't think I introduced it. I think probably folk had done it before me. Secondly, I don't think I did it the same way. I don't think I did it particularly well. It kind of evolved over the years into something different. But Scott Shannon, he was the ultimate. I mean, they would work, and still do. They work so hard in the studio.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
May we help you?
Scott Sue?
Yeah.
I don't want your airtime. I want to know you. I think you're both beautiful, and I want to get to know you. You're excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I want you just to know that I'm 20 years old, and I think that you guys are beautiful. I really do. You make my mornings.
What have you been smoking this morning?
Nothing. I went to a DJ pool last night that inspired me.
Are you a vegetarian?
Almost.
Or a vegetable?
Oh, not at all. I'm lit. Naturally lit.
Naturally lit, huh?
Yeah, I'll say.
Well,
All right.
I'm not trying to be rude, but it takes a certain amount of brain cells to conduct an intelligent conversation over the telephone, and you're checking in a little bit short, my dear.
Am I?
That's right.
On Scott Shannon's program, he would have maybe about 7 or 8 people in the studio. And they would all have their jobs, and one guy would be in the corner doing the drums, live, and another person would be in charge of showbiz gossip, and another person would be there to say something outrageous, and another person would be there as the young person. So I learned from Scott, and also I think probably from Rick Dees, how to cast people, if you like, and I don't mean that to sound cynical, how to cast people for appeal on a radio show. So you would, in the early days, I would have a very young person who would be, I thought, would appeal to the students. You would have somebody to say something outrageous who would be slightly older and, perhaps a little bit reactionary or something like that. And you would have a really nice middle-aged housewife type or house husband type. So you would cast, not like Friends, they would be cast so that you'd always get interesting point of view. And when you ask somebody something in the studio, when you're conversing, there wouldn't be dead silence. Nobody would agree. Because if you've got people agreeing on a radio program, then you're dead in the water. So everybody must have something different to say, have life stories, and be real people. So that, I think, I learned from somebody like Scott Shannon and from people like Rick Dees. And we all copied. We copied the Pirates. We would steal from anybody we could steal from.
Yes, indeed.
Here's Dave
Doubledeck here on Radio Local, just warming up before the programme, as they say. And we've got some great sounds on the show today, and we'll be with you in just a minute. Oh dear.
Dave.
Oh, yes, where were we? Yes, Radio Local with me, Dave X, and...
OK, Dave, we'll come back to you later.
You'll always hear a better oldie on the Steve Wright and the afternoon show.
You'll always hear a better oldie on Steve Wright in the afternoon.
It wasn't always about the music for me, and I think that that's probably a fair point to make. And people would say, well, he doesn't know much about the music. Well, in actual fact, I do. But I'm not one of those guys that would come onto the air and start talking about the music, because there are people like Paul Gambaccini, and there are people like John Peel that used to do that, and there are people like, well, you name them. Those people are good at what they do. I thought I needed to do something else, and that was to be warm and friendly. If I can be entertaining or funny or run a sketch in or have characters or have some atmosphere in the studio, I'll kind of balance it out with a little meaningful speech. But I'm not a music DJ. I'm a DJ, I play records, I love the atmosphere of the music, and I like playing people music, but I like the dynamism of songs, and I like to make them sound good on the radio. I like songs that sound good on the radio. I've always wanted to play whatever is contemporary. Don't want to be locked into an era, although, having said that, if I am locked into an era, I like to play those 70s LA hits. Like Quarter Flash, Harden My Heart, because they make you feel good.
Caller number 24.
Are you kidding?
You just won $3,000.
Are you? Oh, my God. I was on the way taking my kids to school. I put it in reverse and backed up. Oh, my God. This is great. Are you kidding?
You actually went back in the house and called.
Oh, I'm so excited. Woo. Are you joshing? Oh, Rick. Oh.
You got $3,000. You think about that all day long, Brenda.
Oh, Rick. God.
Can you tell us what radio station has the mega bucks?
Kiss FM.
Ow! One song, one phone call, and you're thousands of dollars richer. It's the Daily Cash Payoff from 102.7. It is 8:16, and today's song is Like a Virgin from Madonna. When we play that, wait till it's over, and if you're caller number 32, it's $4,000.
We're looking for caller number 15. Hello, it's Rick Dees. Hello.
Hello, Rick. It's Paul Gambaccini here.
Paul, how are you, sir?
Well, I am fine. Yourself?
Couldn't be better, and thank you so much for thinking of me.
Rick Dees' multi-million seller Disco Duck led not to a long-term recording career, but to more than 3 decades on the front line of American radio.
When it got to number 1 in Memphis, Tennessee, and no radio station was playing it, I went on the radio and said, I have a song called Disco Duck, and it's number 1 all over the world this week. I can't play it, but I just thought I'd let you know we're all celebrating, and thanks a lot. After I got off the air, the general manager invited me into his office and said, you mentioned it, and that's a problem too.
I can't wait to fire you.
So they fired me on the spot. I actually picked up another radio job with their competitor, and it went very well, and somehow from that ended up in Hollywood, California.
Evil wonder. How can? Hey baby, what's happening? This is Dog Man. That's right, if you want to call and talk to the Dog Man on the Rick D Show, you call me. Call me Dog. 520-1979. Oh, don't you want to call and talk to the Dog Man?
No.
Please, call the Dog Man now and tell him how you feel about me.
I ain't got no time for you.
Thank you so much.
Wake up, Rick D's. Rick D's in the morning. 93 KHJ.
It is 7:26, 20th of September, an even day for gas, and beautiful, beautiful weather for the weekend. It's going to be unhealthful air until that point. We got to have some of this junk blown out. But a high today of 93, a little coastal fog by tomorrow morning, and a low down to 68. Right now, everywhere it's close to 70 degrees.
Out on the street, I was talking to a man. He said there's so much, but there's nothing mine that I don't understand. You shouldn't worry, I said that ain't no crime. Cause if you get it wrong, you'll get it right next time.
They had a heritage radio station, but it was an AM radio station, and I didn't know that AM radio was dying out. We did improve the ratings somewhat, but the real change was when they fired me. I got fired again, and they turned it to a country station. I was out of work for over a year, and I said if I ever go back on the radio, if I ever get a chance in Hollywood again, I'm going to do those classic shows, the theater of the mind. So we did it and got on a station called KIIS, 102.7 KISS FM. It was a time when people really discovered the fact that, and this is very simple, the second they started putting FM radio in every car, it was really kind of over for AM except as a talk radio frequency. So that's what happened. Every car in the early 80s had FMs installed at the manufacturing level. And, you know, there's just no way the music will ever sound as good on AM as it does on FM. And that was so obvious with the separation of the channels and all. So I really embraced FM as like the first personality in hit radio to get on FM and have some fun and treat it like AM.
When Rick Dees won the Billboard Radio Personality of the Year award for 10 consecutive years, he was broadcasting on KISS FM. For most of the 1980s, Radio 1 did not have its own FM frequency. It borrowed Radio 2's FM signal for a few hours at night and during the weekend. Rival commercial pop stations had the advantage of being heard in FM stereo. If managed creatively, they could be in touch with local communities in a way a London-based national station could not be. The key programming figure in the history of British commercial radio, Richard Park, had learned this lesson at Radio Clyde in Glasgow.
When Radio Clyde arrived on December the 31st, 1973, the reception was absolutely phenomenal. And the first piece of research done in the Castlemilk area of Glasgow showed that the station had 92% reach penetration. We're still looking for the 4 people who weren't listening.
Clyde was a very, very wide service. I mean, you, for example, did a lot of sport.
I did. That's right. Commentated games right up until I left.
And much wider than stations are now.
Yes.
Do you think that's a good thing, or have we lost something?
Well, I think it's part of what natural progression gives you, because in those days, your musical choice was Radio 1 or Clyde. Your television viewing was BBC 1, BBC 2, ITV, we didn't have a Channel 4. So we could hear Luxembourg from a distance, American Forces Network. That was what Scottish entertainment was in those days. Nowadays, there are dedicated sports channels. You can hear a commentary on so many different outlets, including local BBCs, and they all weren't formed at that time either. I just think it is so different that what we've now got is people in a generation who want the particular genre. The breadth and depth, there are just too many stations. If you do breadth and depth, nobody will know what's on. In 1974 in Glasgow, everybody knew who was on Clyde, when they were on. They were very big local characters.
In the 80s, commercial radio tackled Radio 1's biggest audience of the week, the Sunday afternoon Top 40, with its own chart show. It wasn't just the BBC program that let the commercial sector know a countdown could be a major success. In the United States, where radio stations were local, Casey Kasem's American Top 40 became a focal point of the week when it was syndicated to stations across the country.
American Top 40! AT40 is heard coast to coast and around the world every week on great radio stations like WHBC, Canton, Ohio, KABR, Aberdeen, South Dakota, and CKGO, Hope, British Columbia, in Canada. Now, halfway up the chart at number 20 and moving up, Rhythm Heritage with Beretta's theme.
Casey Kasem presented American Top 40 from 1970 until 88. The current host is Ryan Seacrest. To host the network chart show, British commercial radio turned to David Kid Jensen. The itinerant DJ from Canada had started on Radio Luxembourg in 1968 at the age of 18. He left in 1975 for the Nottingham commercial station Radio Trent, and the following year joined Radio 1, where he served until 1984, with a year off at CNN in Atlanta. This experience of radio and television, BBC and commercial, was perfect preparation for the mixture of work which greeted Jensen when he joined Capital FM in London and the network chart show. The Sunday afternoon program was the UK's first syndicated commercial radio show.
Tony Hale, a former producer at Radio 1, had moved to Capital Radio and had asked if I'd be interested in coming over primarily to host a chart show, which I'd never done before, and it became the network chart show, but also to take over from Michael Aspel and do a program in which I'd be doing interviews on a daily basis with different people. And I thought, this is exactly what I need.
Number 29. That looks like Howie's last week with that one in the chart. Like to get to know you well. Right across the UK, from Swansea Sound to Aberdeen's North Sound, and from Liverpool's Radio City to Portsmouth's Radio Victory. This is the Network Top 30 with David Jensen. And here's the second of our new entries. In at 28, Giorgio Moroder and Phil Oakey.
Having a sponsor was an experience that no one at BBC Radio had ever had. How did it sit with your progressive ethos?
Interesting the way I became kind of a different person. I mean, you might say, did you sell out? Well, I had to have food on the table, and it was a way of working, and it was something that I had been used to at Radio Luxembourg and in America, where you have sponsored programs. I mean, a show that got a sponsor was regarded as a particularly good show. It must be successful, must have something going for it to have a sponsor. And they made good use of their sponsorship in the sense that they used to do billboards around in big cities and towns throughout the country and do these road shows and try and get me on TV just doing interviews and things like that. So they actually kind of worked the sponsorship in a way that was very helpful to the show in terms of its exposure.
How did you find the attitude of the local stations, the individual atoms in the molecule of the chart show?
It was interesting because in America, if you say live from New York, it's Paul Gambaccini, and that's a great thing. Here, we started off saying live from London, the network chart show. But the people at Marcher Sound in Wrexham, no, you're not. You're live in Wrexham. Because for all intents and purposes, I was meant to be an ILR, independent local radio presenter, that happened to be presenting on these stations, but for the sake of the listener, they wanted me to be associated with Wrexham. Other stations took a different view. I remember Downtown Radio in Belfast, a representative being in touch with us early on in the early days, because all the stations in the independent radio network took the chart show, including LBC. But for Downtown Radio, made a very valid point that we were using American terminology and say, in at number 5 with a bullet, it's... And I said, actually, that's not a great thing to say when you're broadcasting to Belfast. And they're absolutely right. So there were a lot of considerations you had to make, and just being careful not to London-centric the program, you know.
In 1987, Richard Park moved from Radio Clyde to Capital. A Scot had come to London as program controller of the city's largest commercial station. The industry was abuzz with speculation as to whether he could cut it in the capital. Park had been impressed by aspects of American radio, both technical and editorial. He applied these lessons to Capital Radio and created what became the new normal, the station sound.
When I was in New York, I would hear the Z100s of this world, and I would hear the way that they processed their music. So when it came out of the transmitters, it absolutely gripped and twisted. So, I mean, just made the sound. Again, it's the shivers down the spine. I think of that particularly, Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time, I heard, just coming out of a shop on Broadway, and it just sounded so awesome. And then, what they did to George Michael's Faith Across there sounded 5 times better than we managed to make it do here. And so that definitely inspired me. But I was aware that the all things to all men approach wouldn't work forever, because as you develop through the business and as you get older yourself, you can see exactly where people are. And so I did realize that actually to pitch the tent in a particular direction would be the way forward in the future. It had to be, because the one thing you can be certain of in evolution, that will mean there'll be more of things that people want in the various areas in which they want them. So when I came down to start this job, I had a particular game plan, and that was to get some youth involved, because some of the presenters were, getting on a bit. Get some youth, get some drive. British Radio at that time was looking to cut to the chase. There was, Radio One of the great professional suite of broadcasters, but they did want to be heard. And I'm sure Simon Bates and Gary Davis wouldn't disagree with me. Probably.
'Cause I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith. Because I got to have faith. I got to have faith.
David Jensen was moved from mid-morning to drive time by Richard Park.
Shortly after I joined Capital, he joined and took the station to number 1. And it was a phenomenal time. A different way of working, completely different ethos in the studio. Not the sort of like relaxed, sort of happy sort of time that we'd had before. A different sort of happiness, a different sort of satisfaction, just because radio was starting to become really competitive. Dog eat dog, much more in the North American vein. And Richard is the one that's kind of recognized that and took Capital to places it had never been before.
He most definitely pioneered the idea of the station sound in Britain.
Yes, I'd say he did pioneer the idea of a station sound, and again, this is a North American idea, but in what is a competitive marketplace, because London, I don't know how many stations it has now, but there's so many stations for people to listen to, and the thing that I suppose that you have to remember as a presenter or programmer is, why should anyone listen to us? What are we doing? What's our difference? What's our point of difference? Are we actually playing the very best song we can at this particular time, or is there a better song we could be playing?
Did you find it easy to be a good soldier?
I find it easy to be a good soldier because, if Richard wants something, then you deliver. It's like, he's a great football fan as well, and there's lots of football analogies. And if he wants you to play in midfield, don't go drifting into defence or changing places with the goalkeeper. Do what you do and do it as best you can. And if he's happy, everybody's happy.
'Cause I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith. Because I gotta have faith. I gotta have faith.
From the day Kid Jensen had joined Radio Luxembourg in 1968 to the week he left the network chart in 1993, British music radio changed beyond recognition. Commercial stations proliferated. Radio 1 achieved nationwide FM coverage from 1988 and began broadcasting 24 hours a day in 1991. In this increasingly competitive market, not all could survive. In an era of better quality signals, the pioneer station with a reception problem struggled. 59 years after Radio Luxembourg first beamed programs in English to the UK, it closed down. It was heard on its 208 meters wavelength for the last time the night of Sunday, the 29th of December, 1991.
And I'm searching for Luxembourg.
The last modern voices heard on 208 were those of program director Jeff Graham and Sean Tilley.
It's a weird one because the radio station's going to close down. But having said that, that this is going to be one of the most historic nights ever in the history of the radio station, and you have to get yourself together because that there are people who perhaps hadn't listened to Radio Luxembourg for about 20 years who very definitely were going to be listening this particular night, because it was all over ITV and BBC News. It was all over the newspapers. We had people ringing in, people like Alan Freeman and various other DJs were calling in live. The last hour was incredible. We had ex-DJs in the studio. There were people like Tony Prince, for instance, Stuart Henry, Bob Stewart. Seeing grown men in tears, it's almost like, wondering what they were thinking as they gazed up to the ceiling, I remember. I can only imagine that all those radio station memories were just flashing before their eyes. I know that was the case for me, but you had to hold it together. Problem is, you get to 3 a.m. and you close the radio station down, and then all of a sudden, you can only go one way. Your emotions plummet through the floor. I remember getting incredibly drunk afterwards, and I remember crying. I cried like a baby. We all did.
Where is Justin now?
Come aboard.
Sean Tilley on Radio Luxembourg with Van Morrison, and in the days before rock and roll, which says it all, really. For the best part of 59 years now, Radio Luxembourg has been a pioneer, a trendsetter for generation after generation. We were the first station to play the UK in Europe, an Elvis record, a Buddy Holly record, and it was here that you heard the Beatles and the Stones for the very first time. It really was the station of the stars. But tonight, we have to say goodnight to you, our cherished listener, for the final time. And to my bosses here at Radio Luxembourg, I personally would like to thank them sincerely for making my broadcasting dream a reality. This, for the last time, has been Sean Tilley on 208. Thanks for listening.
Maybe the morning will find the sun shining.
It's all happening at the Zoo. Part 5 of Music in the Air, A History of Music Radio, was produced by Kevin Howlett and was an independent production for BBC Radio 2 by Howlett Media Productions. I'm Paul Gambaccini. Thanks for listening. Join me next time.